This is a review of The Art of Hercules, The Chaos of Creation. Sometimes it can be really hard to tell if you think something is objectively the best or it's just your personal favorite, but when it comes to Disney art books, for me, this is the one. However, the best books sometimes make for the most boring reviews because there's just a lot of gushing over it and not able to fill a whole lot of time with whining and complaining about things, because it really is just the sort of case of, if you like what you see in this book, then I recommend you go get it. But just for the sake of giving your ears something to do while your eyes are looking at the book, I thought I'd just sort of do a bit of a candid oral history of the Disney art book, because I think that will give a lot of context to this book, especially because I think this is really an art book that was kind of ahead of its time in a way. But before that, I will just touch on my favorite and least favorite things about the book. My number one favorite thing about the book is the size, both the format. It's quite a lot larger than the Disney art books of today, and also in terms of thickness, it's about 200 pages, where today's Disney books tend to be around 160 pages. Also, the text. It's mostly just presented as quotes from the crew, and I found their behind-the-scenes stories to be really entertaining, and the explanation of things, the development, to be very informative. And this quantity and quality of text is something that I think is missing from a lot of animation art books today. And then the thing that I was a little less impressed with is that the text and images are printed quite large and are given quite a lot of space, which means that for a book of this size, the number of images you're getting is probably less than expected compared to the density of the page use in a lot of today's animation art books. But I don't blame it too much, because this was very much how these Disney Renaissance art books were done at the time, which also includes using a lot of stills from the movie, which is always annoying, but less so with this Hercules book, just because the style of this movie is so fantastic. So before Disney started publishing them in the 90s, art books for movies didn't really exist. By the way, I'm just sort of candidly coming up with this history off the top of my head, so if I say anything that's wrong, definitely correct me in the comments. There were very, very rare exceptions, like the art books for the original Star Wars trilogy, or sometimes you'd get some sort of not very good compilation book, say from like Disney or Hanna-Barbera, that collected art from all of the company's work. And then sometimes there would be a making of book for a movie that would also feature concept art. For example, the Batman making of book in '89. But by today's standards, these were not very good. They were really thin and were just glorified magazines. But around this time, the Disney Renaissance was kicking off. And so The Little Mermaid didn't receive any sort of art book, and still hasn't, which is astounding. Technically, there was a book published called The Art of the Little Mermaid by Jeff Curti, but it is not. Beauty and the Beast also didn't receive anything at the time. However, later, an art and making of book for that came out. But then, to coincide with the release of Aladdin, a making of book was released. But that definitely had a lot more in common with the sort of like magazine style books that I was talking about before than a true art or making of book as we understand it today. And then they released The Art of the Lion King, which in my mind is the first modern movie art book. It was a big, proper, fantastic hardcover book with a style and format that was also retained for The Art of Pocahontas and The Art of the Hunchback of Notre Dame. Then we get to this Art of Hercules book, which is kind of a little different. As far as I'm aware, it's actually the first movie art book to use this landscape orientation, which is pretty much how all art books are today. But those other earlier books like The Lion King and stuff, they were actually more like normal books with like a portrait orientation, which is actually a style they would revert to for the art books after Hercules, for like Mulan, Tarzan, and Fantasia 2000. So when you have all these Disney Renaissance art books lined up on your shelf, the Hercules one really stands out because it's really the only one that sort of did its own thing. Also, it feels a lot more special than the other ones. Everything from sort of like the cloth overlay on the spine, and you might have seen at the start of the video, it had this really great wax paper wraparound. And then also in like the center of the book, there's about 6 pages where it changes from the normal glossy paper to this like thick, matte, textured art paper. Completely unnecessary, but just an example of those little touches that really made this a special book. I should probably mention that this Hercules art book, like all of the Disney art books at this time, also had overpriced special editions with like a slipcase and crap, but I don't care about that stuff. But then after the Renaissance ended and we moved into the 2000s, it was like the Wild West for Disney art books. There was no set format. The style and contents were all completely different. Some movies got art books, some didn't. Some were script books, some were making of books. It was all over the place, and none of them were as good as the Disney Renaissance books, which is actually the exact same criticism you could make about the movies themselves. But then by the time we got to Bolt, Disney actually decided to start publishing with Chronicle books and adopt the format and style of art book that they had been using with their Pixar art books since Monsters Inc., I think, which is still the style that is used today. And even though over the years a lot of improvements have been made to the art books in general, and I really think that the Disney art books of today still have a lot they can learn from these earlier ones.